Hello, my name is Dr. Ifan Morgan-Jones, and thank you for the invitation to come to talk to you about this very important issue of how can the news better help us to understand politics. Just to give you some idea of where I am coming from, what my credentials are, as far as I do have any. I am the journalism course leader at Bangor University up in the north of Wales. I was also the founding editor of the website nation.cymru, and I was also an editor of the website Golwg 360, Golwg 360 in Welsh, nation.cymru in English, both attempting to provide some kind of national Welsh media. The media in Wales is particularly weak. There's not a lot of emphasis on matters such as political news in Wales, and the problem essentially is that juxtaposed with that, the media in England and in particular London is very strong. And as a result of that, there is something of an imbalance where people get most of their news from English sources, essentially. Just to focus on some of the problems first, as I said, those gaps in reporting on national and local institutions. So it's not just a lack of attention to what goes on at the Senedd. For instance, there's a lack of scrutiny in Wales of other institutions as well, such as health boards and the councils and so on. We really lack the local media in Wales as well as a national media in Wales. There's also lack of reporting on diverse communities in Wales as well. They don't get much attention. We have very large ethnic minority communities, places like Cardiff, who have been there for hundreds of years. They're not very well reported on in our media. There are also problems with the business models of media in Wales, and this is true for businesses around the world. They've had to adapt to the internet age. We've seen the death of print, the decline of print as a business model, and the internet really hasn't quite filled that gap in terms of providing adequate revenue for journalism. So very often a lot of journalists have to do more with less. We've seen cuts in the number of journalists. In the kind of golden age of print, you'd have hundreds and hundreds of journalists sometimes working for a newspaper. These days, when you've got websites, you can almost count the number of journalists on your hand very often in terms of how many are actually working on titles and across titles. And this kind of democratic deficit, it also leaves a gap for fake news then to flourish. For instance, we saw this quite a bit during the pandemic when there was a lot of misinformation going around. And if you don't have journalists there who actually have the time to do investigative journalism and go out and find out what is actually happening, very often you do then see some kinds of fake news or slapdash news, very often perhaps filling that gap. You could argue that more people are actually getting news about Wales than ever before. You've got sites like Wales Online, for instance. They have a readership of about 50 million people clicking on their website every month. Even our site, nation.cymru, which only has 2.5 staff members, we've got over 1 million people clicking on that site every month. And so it's positive in terms of more and more people having access to Welsh news than ever before. Another positive development is that people are just taking this problem more seriously now, and more people are thinking about it. And the fact that you are participating in this is a sign of that as well. And there are quite a lot of initiatives at the moment with people trying to get to grips with this question. Well, one of the main problems, I think, is that the commercial model for media in Wales is always going to be quite weak compared to that in England. We're a comparatively poorer country. We've got a comparatively smaller population, 20 times smaller than England. And that means that any kind of British media is going to be primarily aimed at areas such as London because they have a lot of people and they're also comparatively richer. So the advertisers that actually make the business models of these news sites and newspapers work also want to target places like London where people are wealthier, they're slightly younger on average, and there are more of them than there are in Wales, where we are comparatively poorer and older, and there's less of us. So advertisers don't want to target us, and so they don't want to give money to newspapers and news sites in order to create news for areas such as Wales. What I would suggest doing would be, rather than the Welsh Government funding a new news platform, what I would suggest instead is that they fund a news wire. And what news wire is something that is available to all or a lot of journalists who can then make use of that content. Some news wires include things like Press Association, Reuters, and also something called the Local Democracy Reporting Service, which already exists in Wales and is funded by the BBC. And what this does is provide some coverage of things such as councils, local authorities, for instance, and some other local news. And then onwards to my last suggestion for consideration, which is to make better use of the funding that already exists towards journalism. And quite a few sites out there have some public funding. The BBC, of course, has public funding through the licence fee. Sites such as Nation.Cymru, which I'm the director of, have some public funding through the Welsh Books Council, and a lot of Welsh language sites have public funding as well, such as Golwg 360, BBC Cymru Fyw, and also Newyddion S4C as well. So what I would suggest is that we think a little bit more strategically about how we can target that public funding. For instance, at the moment you've got three sites, Golwg 360, BBC Cymru Fyw, and Newyddion S4C, whose output overlaps to a certain extent. They're all doing sort of quite similar jobs, but their funding all come from different pots. You've got some funding coming from the BBC, you've got some funding coming from S4C, you've got funding coming through the Books Council, and I think there needs to be a kind of a holistic discussion about how we actually target those funds more strategically to ensure that there isn't that overlap and that they're all doing different jobs. The other criticism might be that people may argue that we should support types of journalism that are already successful, and that success shows that there is a demand there. So they might think, well, why should we put money into covering these institutions or these communities or these geographical areas? Because if they can't sustain a media anyway, well, that just shows that there isn't a demand for one. My response to that, I think, would be that it's not just a matter of demand, but it's a matter of demographics and wealth as well. Advertisers like to target quite wealthy communities. They like to target quite young communities because it's easier to influence young people's brand preferences than it is to influence older people. And so the free market tends to gear itself towards wealthier areas of the UK and also younger areas of the UK and ones with a larger population. So I don't think the weakness of the media in Wales is all to do with a lack of demand. As we see, if you've got 50 million people tuning into Wales Online, there's clearly a demand there every month I think the problem is just making it work from a commercial point of view.